And people were beginning to say, well, you know, what is this area? What can we do with it? How can we exploit this properly so we can make some money here? Finally, a guy by the name of Dr. James Young, a physician in Edenville, began to take an interest in mineralogy, and he collected rocks. And it was discovered that some of the rocks that he was collecting had never ever been seen before, ever. In fact, one rock, the only other place where this rock appears even today that we know of, is in southern Congo, in Africa, in Central Africa. And it's called Warwick. And Young gave them these names: Edenite, Warwickite, stones that no one had names for. They'd never seen them before. And Young, who's extremely a very well educated man with an MD degree, this is in the 1830s, decided to go into mineralogy. And he became more than just a mineral buff. I mean, he became an internationally recognized mineralogist, and he wrote extensively, and people read his works and came here from all over Europe and America. And they would come to Edenville, and they would come to Amity. And they would be climbing all over here looking at these stones, hoping maybe they'd find gold and other types of minerals too. But spinels and just rocks of different colors, polished rocks.
Garnets too.
Garnet, I mean, just amazing, dozens and dozens of different varieties of rock. Thanks to Valerie here, they put up a sign next to the Crystal Inn, bringing attention to this fact. This is really an unusual area for minerals. And so, so Amity gained fame for that reason. And then, of course, this was part of Goshen. When Orange County, when the patents were all subdivided into farms, precincts were established, not towns, but precincts. And then after the American Revolution, the precincts were reconfigured into towns, incorporated towns. So, for example, Warwick became a town in 1788. Before 1788, this was the part of the precinct of Goshen. So that began to change. The politics of the area began to change. We began to have town government. And we began to have these hamlets that had really no government as such other than town government. Village government really didn't begin around here until 1867. As you know, Warwick Village is going to celebrate the 150th anniversary next year of its incorporation. Now, in Amity, there were distilleries, though. That's one thing they built. There were quite a few distilleries. And alcohol abuse became an early problem around here. And people began to complain. And the answer was, well, you know, they need some spirituality. They need good Christian discipline. And so a group of people here in Amity founded the Amity Presbyterian Church in 1796. And they established what they called the Presbyterian Society of Amity. And a group of prominent people in the area formed this church. They raised some money, and they built a very small church. They spent a lot of money. There's 5 members gave $81 each. That was a lot of money, $81 in 1796, a lot of money. And they built their first meeting house here. It cost $1,100, even though most people here were very poor. This was not a wealthy area by any means. There were no regular services. There was no permanent pastor here until 1809. And they weren't able to keep a pastor really for very long. They would just keep moving around their itinerants until 1813, when they built a parsonage down the road here, a very nice building, and finally they were able to attract a pastor who was willing to stay here and raise a family and be here full time. But that church became a very important center for the entire community. A lot went on in that church, just not Sunday morning worship. All kinds of concerts and plays and meetings and so forth. Okay, so then I looked at the establishment of schools. Common schools were set up here after as a result of the law of 1813. Common schools were, towns were to be divided up, subdivided into school districts. This was school district number 2 in 1813. It took a number of years before they actually built a school. It wasn't until 1817, I believe, the first mention I found of a school here in Amity, right down the street here. And these were primary schools, though. They were to be public schools. Every child, every family had a right to send their child to that school. So Amity began to gain in literacy. And then I looked at what I call the era of the Timlows, T-I-M-L-O-W-S. Reverend William Timlow was pastor here from 1819 to 1858. He died here in Amity at the age of 88 in 1870. But as he got old, guess who took over from him? His son. His son. And then his son is a pastor here for years. So you had this long stretch of Amity history that really was pretty much under the authority of the Timlow family. The Timlows were highly respected and they were highly educated. I mean, for example, the Amity Home School was established in 1873 here through the efforts of the Timlows and also the Seeley family, Dr. Seeley, who was a physician here in Amity. It started out in his home, called the Amity School, and it had a classical education. And then 2 years later, I believe it was 1875, when the school, Amity School, actually had a building that still stands just beyond the church here, just a few yards from the church. And the school offered Greek and Latin and so forth. And it's not surprising that from that time onward, Amity was sending a lot of their kids off to college. Ivy League schools, like Princeton was a favorite. And a lot of these kids were graduating from this little Amity Home School, here it is, and going on to Princeton, in those days called Princeton College, and coming back and becoming leaders here in our community and leaders across the entire United States. So Amity was an area that gained recognition then for its very, very well-educated and enlightened peoples. I guess relatively enlightened, but becoming a little class-oriented because, for example, in the church, they wanted to build a new church, they needed money, so they said, hey, look, let's rent pews to raise money. We'll lease the pews, and we'll charge them different prices regarding whether they're going to be up in the balcony or toward the rear or on one side or the other side. They're all priced differently, but they weren't cheap. They weren't cheap even by 19th century dollars. And then if you couldn't afford it, if you were really poor, then they had a special area way in the back for those who didn't have enough money to rent pews. But most of them were rented in the 1860s. They would go for anywhere between $10 and $15. But still, that was a fair amount of money.
$10 and $15 for what period of time?
Around the Civil War period.
No, I'm saying $10 for how long?
You mean how large the pew? How many seats in the pew?
Per year, $10 for
Oh yeah, for a year. Oh yeah. They have to be renewed each year.
Was it integrated?
So, no, I don't believe so. I mean, I don't know. I don't have it documented, but there was an African American population and a poor white population, and I'm afraid they were being segregated. Anyone could come to worship. I knew that. I mean, anyone could worship during a regular service, but clearly there was social and racial discrimination. I don't think there's any question about it. The Timlows were disciplinarians. They were very authoritarian. For example, they established an organization in the church called the Sessions. And the Sessions, it was like a court. And for example, there were, believe it or not, in the 1860s, they had one big issue of transgender. A young man began to dress as a woman and coming into church, And it created a huge commotion, and the sessions told this person that, no, you can't do this.
Go to Carolina.
You just can't come back to church. But it was a wrenching decision, and there was a fair amount of debate. But there are other things. You couldn't go to the horse races in Goshen, or any place really. You're not to engage in any kind of betting on horses, and even strongly discouraged from attending horse races. And you could not sell beeswax mixed with tallow. That was considered fraud. If you were selling something and you were saying it was pure honey, that you would add a little bit of tallow to it. That was not was looked down upon, and you were punished. And also intemperance. And there was a large branch of women here who were members of the, what was it called, the Temperance Society. There are a number of key members that came from Amity. They met over in Warwick, but I saw by the names there were quite a few of the important ones were from Amity here. During the Civil War, people were very divided here. There were pro-Lincoln Republicans, abolitionists, but there were also Copperheads and there were dissident groups as well. So that was certainly a debated issue in the church leading into the Civil War. Coming out of the Civil War, they decided to build a new church, which stands right here today. That was dedicated in 1869. It cost $12,500. And a pipe organ was installed in the church in 1896 for the centennial of the founding of the church. And it was a very ecumenical